I want to thank them for their continued hard work and to make sure that our community are taken care of. And a special thank you again to those.
I've seen all good people turn their heads each day, so satisfied I'm on my...
To call the Planning Commission meeting to order. Welcome to the May 24th, 2022 Huntington Beach Planning Commission meeting. While the Planning Commission welcomes public involvement and free speech, it rejects comments from anyone that are discriminatory, defamatory, or otherwise not protected speech. Those comments will not inform nor be considered by the Planning Commission and may be cause for the chair to interrupt the speaker. Such Planning Commission and may be cause for the chair to interrupt the speaker. Such comments will not be consented to or otherwise adopted by the Planning Commission in its discussions and findings for any matter tonight. Thank you. Would Commissioner Adam please lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
Love to.
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, may we have the roll call, please?
Commissioner Adam? Here. Commissioner Mandic?
Here.
Vice Chair Costa Galvan?
Here.
Chair Perkins?
Here.
Commissioner Scandura?
Here.
Commissioner Rodriguez?
Here.
Commissioner Ray?
Here.
Okay, we have a quorum.
Thank you. So I did want to make an exciting new announcement. We do have a new planning manager for the city. His name is Matthew Snyder. So I just wanted to welcome you aboard on behalf of all of the commission.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. I'm on day 4, so very much still green, but not green to planning, and looking forward to working on everything here in Huntington Beach and working with the commission. Thank you.
So we'll see if we can tax your knowledge tonight as we go through our agenda items. Okay. Okay, so now it's time for public comments. Do we have any public comments?
We have no public comments.
Okay, so next on the agenda are the public hearing items. Our first public hearing item is General Plan Amendment 20-003, Zoning Text Amendment 20-003, Tentative Tract Map 19118, Conditional Use Permit 20-025, and Environmental Assessment 20-003, otherwise known as the Holy Triangle Townhomes. Do we have a staff report? Oh, no, I'm sorry. First, disclosures by planning commissioners. So I'll start on my right with Commissioner Adam.
Yeah, I spoke with the applicant representative one time over the phone.
I spoke with the applicant representative as well.
I also spoke with the applicant representative on the phone.
And I visited the site and spoke with staff.
And I too visited the site, spoke with the staff, spoke with the applicant's representative, and then I also had a side conversation with 2 planning commissioners regarding the pipeline easement. And by the way, I think it's Holly Triangle, not Holy Triangle.
Thanks for the correction.
I don't think we're building.
Maybe we should change the pronunciation. I don't know, but
I don't think we're building a cathedral here.
I spoke with the applicant, a representative of the applicant, and I also spoke with another planning commissioner. That's it.
And I visited the site.
Okay, staff, can we have the presentation?
Yes, Alyssa Helper will give the presentation.
Good evening, Commissioners. The item before you tonight is the Holly Triangle Townhomes project proposed by Benani Development. The Holly Triangle Townhomes project consists of the following 5 entitlement requests: a general plan amendment, a zone text amendment, a tentative tract map, a conditional use permit, and an environmental assessment in the form of an addendum to the Holly Sea Cliff Specific Plan EIR. Before I introduce the entitlement request, I'd first like to introduce the project site. In its existing setting, The site consists of a primarily vacant property with the exception of a small glass shop at the corner of Garfield and Holly Lane. The property has a general plan land use designation of commercial neighborhood specific plan and is also zoned for commercial uses in the Holly Seacliff specific plan. The city owns a small parcel traversing the central portion of the site that was originally established for the purposes of an oil pipeline easement. Benani Development owns all of the other parcels on the property. The site is surrounded by residential uses on all sides. Benani Development approached the city with a proposal to develop the site with 35 attached townhomes, of which 15%, or 5 units, would be affordable to moderate-income households. The proposed units will be located in 7 separate buildings situated throughout the site with landscaping provided in between. There will also be 2 open space areas concentrated in the middle of the site. Each unit will have its own parking garage with 2 spaces, with additional guest parking located in the central area of the site, as well as an ADA space. Access to the site will be provided off Holly Lane with an emergency vehicle access only point located off of Main Street. There will be a gate there with a Knox box. The project includes 11 2-bedroom units and 24 3-bedroom units. The project will be designed in a modern coastal farmhouse architectural style. It will incorporate facade breaks, roof variations, and variations in color to ensure that the overall mass and scale of the project is consistent with surrounding development. The Design Review Board reviewed the project at their January meeting and made a few recommendations regarding the design, namely to add horizontal bars to upper story windows and to paint the headers gray. These have been incorporated into the conditions of approval for the CUP and the tentative track map. The applicant is proposing to amend the general plan land use designation on the site from commercial neighborhood to residential medium density. The RM designation is an extension of the same designation found on surrounding properties. Redevelopment of the property with a residential townhome project would support the city's general plan goals and policies, promoting infill development and adding to the city's overall housing stock. The project also includes a zone text amendment to change the zoning classification within the specific plan from commercial to residential medium density. Approval of the ZTA would implement the land use designation proposed as part of the GPA and would enable redevelopment of the site with 35 attached townhomes at a density of 15 dwelling units per acre, which is consistent with the permitted density for RM uses in the specific plan. The tentative tract map will consolidate 12 existing lots into one parcel on a 1.80 net acre site for development of the attached townhomes. The only existing easement on the property is a private utility easement for the oil pipeline, which was originally granted to allow Standard Oil to put the oil pipeline on the property. The easement will continue to be in place following implementation of the project. The subdivision will provide all necessary street improvements, sidewalk improvements, and utility easements to serve the new project. The project is also requesting a CUP to allow for the development of the 35 attached townhomes up to 40 feet in height. The project is also requesting a CUP to allow for 6-foot-high perimeter walls within the 15-foot front yard setback along Main Street and 43-inch and 6-foot-high block walls within the 10-foot front yard setback along Holly Lane. These walls are necessary to provide privacy to on-site residents. Landscaping will also be provided in front of the walls to soften their overall appearance, which is consistent with our design guidelines. The city prepared and certified the Holly Seacliff Specific Plan EIR in 1990, which evaluated potential environmental impacts associated with implementation of the Holly Seacliff Specific Plan. The specific plan and its accompanying EIR identified the subject property as a commercial land use. Although the EIR considered the impacts of commercial development on the property, the proposed residential use would result in a less intense project than what was proposed and evaluated in the specific plan and its EIR. As demonstrated in the addendum that was prepared for the project, the proposed project would not result in any new significant impacts or an increase in the severity of a previously identified impact. No new mitigation measures would be required. However, modifications to existing mitigation measures have been made to ensure that the project complies with current standards and mitigation identified in the specific plan EIR. The applicant is also seeking to invoke development tools and privileges outlined in the California Density Bonus Law. Due to the provision of 15% of the total units as affordable to moderate income households, the project qualifies for a 10% density bonus. A 10% density bonus would allow for 3 additional units over the base 32 units. As shown on this slide, and for reference, a 4-person household at the moderate income level in Orange County currently has an annual income of approximately $128,000. Tentative tract map conditions 3 and 5 require that the applicant submit an affordable housing agreement to the city and that the affordable units remain affordable for at least 45 years. Under state law, the number of required incentives or concessions that are granted to a project is based on the percentage of affordable units included as part of that project. Projects that include 15% of the proposed units as affordable to moderate income households are entitled to 1 incentive or concession. Although the project qualifies to receive 1 incentive or concession, the applicant has not requested any incentives or concessions as part of this project. Developments qualifying for a density bonus can also receive an unlimited number of waivers of from development standards. The project only includes 2 waivers to allow for a 10-foot front yard setback along Holly Lane and to allow for 15 feet and 16 feet building separation in lieu of 20 between several of the on-site buildings. Per the density bonus law, the city may not require parking beyond what is required by the state for projects qualifying for a density bonus. As illustrated by this table, state law requires a provision of 53 spaces on the site. However, the project has elected to provide 82 spaces, or 29 more spaces than what is required under state law. Approval of the GPA and ZTA and the subsequent development of the property with townhome units would be consistent with allowable residential units in the RM designation and would be consistent with other land uses in the vicinity of the site, including 2-story apartment buildings across Holly Lane, 3-story detached units across Garfield Avenue, and 2-story condos across Main Street. Staff is recommending approval of the project based on the following. The addendum is adequate and complete, and that it has identified all potential environmental impacts associated with the project. The addendum demonstrates that the project will not have new or substantially more severe impacts that were not disclosed in the certified final EIR for the Holly Seacliff specific plan. The GPA, ZTA, TTM, and CUP are consistent with the general plan and its goals and policies and are also consistent with the surrounding area. The project meets all the requirements of the Subdivision Map Act, and the request will provide additional housing on the site and add to the city's overall housing stock. Before I open it up for questions, I'd like to just note that the applicant, their representative, and our environmental consultant, Connie DeBreva with EPD Solutions, are available to answer any questions that you may have.
Okay, thank you, Alyssa. So so it looks like we do have commissioners who want to ask questions. So starting with Commissioner Ray.
I think I need to go first.
Thank you.
Oh, you need to go first?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I just
Oh,
need
go
to
ahead.
disclose that I was on the design review board when this project came forward and voted on it.
Okay, thank you.
Is the only access to the project on Holly Street?
Yes, the only access point is off Holly. An emergency vehicle access point is located off Main Street, but that will be gated and not available to the public.
And that brings up my question. If you're going kind of northbound on Main Street, access would be, there's a left turn lane where you have to make a U-turn and go down to the street to Holly and then hang a right to go in. Is there any consideration changing that, or are we going to, does that sound like that's the way the applicant wants it or how the city wants it?
There haven't been any discussions about changing it. I think access is fairly limited on the site as to where it can be due to the oil easement, and we want to make sure that we really keep that free from any development. So the access really runs with that oil easement on the site, the drive aisle that you see.
Okay, thanks.
Commissioner Mandic, did you have any additional? Okay. So Commissioner Rodriguez.
Yes, this is probably for the consultants. Can you explain what abandonment means within relationship to the pipeline? Abandonment of the, so this, on the EIR, it says that some of the wells have already been abandoned and then they're going to be re-abandoned. Can you explain that?
Hi, good evening, commissioners. Regarding the oil wells, I can help with that, which is essentially separate from the oil pipeline that's on site. So there are four oil wells on site. Two of them meet the current state standard for development, and the other two will need to be re-abandoned to current CalGEM standard, which is the state oversight of oil well abandonment. So we at the local level essentially require that current standard to be met prior to any development over an oil well.
Okay, thank you. And then on page 92 on the EIR, it states that well CWC 51 leaks small amount of methane. So this well it basically was already abandoned and it's now leaking again. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
So is there any concern that in the future, if we re-abandon that the well could start leaking again? Any well on the property?
So meeting current standard, they go down hole with permits and add necessary plugs, cement casings, etc., to do all possible to mitigate any future leakage. This is very common for all over, especially that downtown area of the city.
Okay, perfect. No more questions, thank you. Thank you, appreciate it.
Any other comments or questions from commissioners?
I guess I have one.
Go ahead, Commissioner Mandic.
Yes, it states that they're 40 feet tall. What is allowed on the roof besides the roof? Is anything above the roof?
There are roof decks on the roof to allow for to meet the private open space requirements, but other than that, I don't think there's anything else on the roof.
Okay, is there like a railing around it?
The roof decks would be required to have a railing, yeah, for safety purposes. That's building code too.
Okay, and offhand, do you know how tall those extend up?
I think they have to be 3.5 feet at minimum.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, so I do have a question, or maybe a couple questions regarding the pipeline. So the pipeline is still in operation, correct?
Yes.
Okay, and how is that managed? What state or city entities monitor what goes on with the pipeline, and if there's any issues with the pipeline?
So pipelines are regulated by CAL FIRE's Division of Pipeline Safety, and they have jurisdiction over the pipeline on the site. However, any activities related to the pipeline also need to be coordinated with the pipeline operator, which is Crimson.
Okay, and if the pipeline, at any point the owner doesn't need to use the pipeline anymore, and it, essentially it just has no future use, what is there a decommissioning process with that, or how is that managed?
It would be through whatever regulatory agencies have oversight of the pipeline itself. However, the project has been designed to sort of leave that drive aisle over the pipeline so that any activities required by any agency with oversight on the pipeline could conduct those activities.
Okay. All right. Then the other question I had was regarding the two oil wells that need to be re-abandoned. So I know this is something that comes up routinely in a lot of the items that come in front of the board, so it's nothing new to the commission. I do wonder, though, do the standards for re-abandonment, have they evolved over time, or did they change at some point and then they've been fairly static? And the reason I ask is, let's say that the standard changes, we develop over an abandoned oil well to the current standard. Is there any any situation where you have to go back and re-abandon an oil well after development has already been implemented on the property?
So there really hasn't been an official new standard that CalGEM has for abandonment. However, there have been a change in interpretation at the state level, so that has changed some of the more environmental aspects of the abandonment of an oil well. So I am not familiar with any sort of, after a development has been conducted, a well abandoned a current standard, having to go back to that well to re-abandon it after it's meeting current standard. So what we're trying to avoid, right, is putting a structure over an oil well and having an issue to where that structure has to come down.
Okay. That's it for me. Any questions from any other commissioners? Okay. I believe we can move on to the public hearing. Do we have any comments under public hearing?
We have one speaker, Ed Mountford.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners. My name is Ed Mountford. I'm representing Bonani Development tonight. With me, I have Chris Segersman, who is project manager from Bonani. And Bonani is a local Huntington Beach company. Their offices are here in Huntington Beach. They've been in business for over 30 years, and Ed Bonani lives in Huntington Beach. So it really is a local company building this project. Staff did a very thorough job on the overview that they provided you. One thing I would like to touch on, just to enhance the record a little bit with respect to the zone change. You know, some of you may ask the question, well, why change the zoning from commercial to residential? So I provided this exhibit for you to and maybe help explain it. It's been zoned commercial since 1992, so for 30 years, and there's no commercial development on the property with the exception of the Gall glass in that one corner. And there's several reasons for that. One is obviously the small size of the property. Net is less than 2 acres. Also the shape of the property. It's triangular, doesn't really provide for very efficient development. And then another reason is where it's located, with surrounded on 3 sides by streets, and the fact that it is a small parcel, it doesn't really provide very much access, very good access from either Garfield or Main Street. And as you can see from the exhibit, when you include the setbacks from Garfield, Main Street, and Holly, and when you include the easement for the oil pipeline, it really doesn't leave much left that's really developable. And again, the access is really difficult because you're so close to the intersection of Garfield and Main Street that I'm sure Public Works would not look very favorably on ingress and egress from either of those 2 streets. So you're really left with Holly, and probably from a commercial standpoint, that's probably not a very good ingress egress point if you're a commercial developer. So I just wanted to get some more of that information on the record in terms of why change the zoning on this property from commercial to residential. So that really concludes my comments. I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Okay. Do I need to go into deliberation before he can answer questions?
We have no further speakers. You may ask questions.
Okay. Do we have any questions from any of the commissioners?
I had a question for Commissioner Sandura. Can you shed some light on your issue about the pipeline from last time? I didn't.
Yeah, I was going to talk about that once we're done, and also some comments on well abandonment and pipeline abandonment.
Whenever it's appropriate.
Okay, so we'll do that during deliberation, which we'll go into now. So, having no additional speakers, so would you like to start off with that?
Sure.
Okay.
I'll go ahead and do that first, and because it's not appropriate for a commissioner to engage in discussions prior to the public hearing, I didn't want to answer any questions about well abandonment or pipeline abandonment. And I have to say, I'm not an expert on this, but I am, somewhat familiar with these kinds of things. Basically, what well abandonment amounts to is the process of closing down an oil well and removing all of the equipment. It is true, over the decades, the standards have changed. 70, 80 years ago, you were done with your well, you just shut it down, remove the equipment, maybe put some kind of little cap or whatever on top of the well and just run away with it, or leave the property. Now, over the years, they've actually come up with some very, very strict standards for how you abandon the well. And in addition to removing all the equipment, you also remove all the associated pipelines. I believe you do remove soil contamination. And then the biggest thing is what's called plugging the oil well, which is actually filling it with the grout or cement or whatever, so that oil and gases and other materials can't seep out of there. If there is any methane that's associated with this, and that's still leaking from those wells, certainly the methane barrier is going to capture that, because that's one of the conditions of approval. We have an active pipeline, which I'm going to go into a little bit of detail in a second. If indeed that pipeline's abandoned, I am not sure if there's any laws or regulations that require that the oil company remove the pipeline. However, my understanding is that typically what oil companies will do is once the last of the oil or whatever it's used for blows through there, then they typically will flush out the pipeline. Sometimes they may plug the line, but as far as actually removing it, I mean, it may wind up being something between the property owner, which in this case would probably be the homeowners association, and the company that owns the pipeline. So, what's this thing about this pipeline that's on the property? We all got the EIR addendum a few days before we got our staff package, and I had a chance to go through that. And of course, being that I'm in the hazardous substances field for about 40 years, I obviously glommed onto the hazardous and hazardous materials section of the EIR. And that was based on a phase 1 and phase 2 environmental assessment that was done by an environmental consultant for the applicant. Phase 1 is basically file and record search, and phase 2 is actually on-site soil sampling. And when I looked at it, I didn't see anything that really stuck out that would preclude or prevent or stop any kind of development from going on. I mean, there's just been a variety of small industrial uses over the years. Contamination is what you expect, and it can be easily remediated. So I really didn't see any problems. And then 2 days later, we get the staff package, and it mentions something about the city wanting to vacate a pipeline easement. And I went back through the EIR, I went back through the environmental assessment. There was no mention whatsoever anywhere about an active pipeline. I also looked at all the plans, and if you look at the plans right now, you will not see anything about a pipeline. You will clearly see an easement. So I immediately called the staff, and we began a number of meetings, and I explained to them that without this being disclosed in the EIR, there was no way the city could impose mitigation measures to ensure that residents, construction workers, and everybody else is protected by this pipeline. Also, there was no authority for the city to require in the CCNRs that the HOA make provisions for this pipeline, including access for the pipeline company to go in and maintain it. Pipeline companies also have their own requirements. So that was the reason for the continuance. The staff did go in there and revise the hazards section. You'll see it all in the underlined part, and I'm satisfied with that. Now, one of the key things that's going to have to happen is that should this project be approved by the city, then the next step is for the developer to actually have an environmental consultant go out there and actually do additional investigation and then design a remedial action plan and then implement that plan. And the way it's called for in the mitigation measures is the Department of Toxic Substances Control. My old employer would actually oversee that. There are some changes to the conditions I do want to propose. Needless to say, the fact that this pipeline was not disclosed amounted to a gross emission. The section talks about hazards and hazardous materials. What is in a pipeline but a hazardous material? And that was not disclosed. When I visited the site, one of the things I saw out there was that there was an actual marker that indicated the oil pipeline. So how this was excluded from the environmental assessment and subsequently the environmental impact report is just beyond me. It was either there was a problem with the consultant's abilities or there was something else going on here. And so I want to make sure that going forward, this kind of thing doesn't happen, that we have competent consultants who will do the assessment and remediation work, that they will report directly to the city and to the regulatory agency, and that the work will be done in compliance with all the standards. Oh, so there's adequate communication and coordination. So I will be proposing some additional, actually they would be conditions of approval. They would go into the conditions of approval and basically would say that all work performed to assess the extent of soil and soil gas contamination shall be performed by a qualified contractor approved by the city. And the city does have its list of contractors that it uses. The city and environmental regulatory oversight agencies will have the ability to contact and communicate with this contractor independently of the applicant. In other words, the city and, of course, the regulatory agency can contact the consultant directly. And then all deliverable documents, they typically submit work plans and reports and that kind of thing. They would be submitted directly to the city and to the regulatory agency in addition to the applicant. On a lot of projects, they typically go through the applicant before they get to the regulatory agency, so I don't want that to happen. So that would be the first condition. The second condition, it only comes because of my 33 years that I was at the Department of Toxic Substances Control, including 30 of those years as a branch chief. There's a problem with DTSC overseeing petroleum contamination. In both the federal and the state Superfund laws, there is a provision called the petroleum exclusion, which states that the United States Environmental Protection Agency at federal Superfund sites and DTSC at state Superfund sites cannot impose requirements on sites where the contamination is strictly from petroleum hydrocarbons. That's because way back when these laws were passed over 40 years ago, the oil companies lobbied Congress and the legislature to ensure that all the oil fields and refineries and tank farms and what have you didn't become Superfund sites. However, the legislature did pass 20 years ago a law that allows a party to enter into a voluntary cleanup agreement with DTSC to oversee the cleanup work. And so that's how this would work. The trouble is that a voluntary cleanup agreement is one of those agreements where either party can walk away. And so that could be a problem here. So so in the event that DTSC is unable to oversee the investigation remediation of this work, the condition would then read that the applicant shall seek regulatory oversight from either the Santa Ana Regional Water Quality Control Board or the Orange County Health Care Agency. Both of those agencies have the capabilities of overseeing that kind of work. And then the last condition, I didn't get a chance to talk with the staff about this. I would like to see as a condition all the project plans in Attachment 5 updated, or the project plans in Attachment 5 updated to show the active pipeline in the city-owned easement. All it shows right now are two dotted lines that are the inside and the outside of the easement. We have to see where that pipeline is exactly on those project plans, especially this is just a measure to prevent any kind of accidentally hitting that pipeline or doing something that would compromise that pipeline.
Okay, any other comments, Commissioner Mandick?
I just wanted to ask Commissioner Skander,
Can you turn on your mic? Turn on your mic. Thank you.
Does there need to be any kind of a special wording of disclosure to the residents moving in that's not in here already, to tell them that it is an active pipeline?
Generally, as I understand it, I believe the state requires that all hazards have to be disclosed whenever somebody wants to buy a piece of property. So yes, this pipeline needs to be disclosed to any and all buyers, anybody who wants to buy that. And then, of course, the homeowners association, once they take title of this property, take full control of this property, they're going to be dealing directly with the oil company. So, yeah, I mean, one way or another.
Right.
Now, I just want to make it clear that I don't see this pipeline as something that would necessarily preclude or stop the development. In fact, it wouldn't. There's been plenty of developments that have occurred near pipelines, but there have to be adequate precautions taken to make sure that there's no incompatibility or that the pipeline isn't compromised by the construction or the active work that's going on out there.
Any other comments, questions? Can staff confirm that potential buyers would be notified of this as being a hazard, or how that would be handled?
Yes, we have modified the condition of approval related to the CCNRs to ensure disclosure to all homeowners, and a mitigation measure that was modified in the addendum further states that disclosures need to occur to all potential home buyers on the site.
And you monitored the wording to say it's an active well?
I think it says...
Excuse me, an active pipeline.
It says I'll pull it up, but it refers to all oil infrastructure, including wells and the pipeline on the site.
Okay. Any other comments? Okay. So thank you for all of your work, John. I really appreciate everything that you've brought to light, and I'm glad that this, did not escape our notice in considering this development, and I'm sure I say that for all the other commissioners. I do want to make a comment regarding the development itself. So I too don't see anything with this development that is out of the ordinary or, separate from considering the pipeline issue. I think this is something that's very standard. It looks very much like other developments we've had come through. I think that the zoning change is appropriate for the area that this development is proposed for, and I think that this property has essentially been vacant for a very long time, so it would be nice to see this piece of property developed and helping to beautify the area. So I intend to support this item with the conditions that John Scandura has proposed. And having said that, if there are any other questions or comments, I would ask for a motion.
I'd like to just state that one option would also be, rather than modifying the conditions, we could modify one of the existing mitigation measures that already pertains to the pipeline to further add what Commissioner Scandura has proposed. So in this case, that would be mitigation measure human health and safety number 4, which already has information related to DTSC oversight. And there are several bullet points under this, and we could essentially just add one or more bullet points to that measure. And then it would help staff because we could include it in the mitigation monitoring and reporting program. And that way, throughout construction, it would be very easy to kind of check off what is being done and ensuring that the applicant is following all recommended conditions and all requirements.
Okay, and do all of the conditions that Commissioner Scandura proposed, would they be appropriate for handling in that manner?
Staff doesn't have any opposition to what was being proposed, to what's been proposed. Yeah.
Okay, using the method that you're proposing to modify the existing conditions.
Yeah, one of the reasons for that is the measure already has timing for when those things would need to occur. So for example, prior to issuance of grading permits would be the timing, and we could ensure that the applicant hires a qualified consultant that's approved by the city, and then further that any reports that were produced are received by the city the regulatory agency overseeing the activities and the applicant simultaneously. And then further, because it refers to DTSC, we could add language that should a voluntary cleanup agreement or anything of that nature not move forward with DTSC, the applicant would proceed with oversight through another agency like the Regional Water Quality Control Board, which is very standard for projects with any type of remediation activities on site.
Okay, thank you, Alyssa. So John, can I get you to craft a motion? Since
Yeah.
you're very good at it.
Yeah, I learned that from another commissioner years ago, Tom Livengood. And also Commissioner Mandix good at that too, so it's, for a number of years. So, and I'll just say, beyond the pipeline, I too don't have a problem with this development. I mean, one might say that it's some of those buildings are a little bit packed together in there a little closely, but, because they are building affordable housing, they are entitled to the density bonus, and they are entitled to that waiver, so there's not much we can do about that. I know I had a little bit of concern about just the egress strictly out of Holly Street. The only other way you could come out of there is at the other end of that easement. Well, the trouble I'm seeing here is that people who want to take a shortcut, through the track, rather than having to go around, would instead go right through the development. So I don't think that would be so good either.
I also think that if we requested or required that, it would reduce the affordable housing that they would be able to develop on site.
So I don't have a problem with the actual development itself. And Bonanni Homes is an experienced developer. I've been involved in several. In fact, I probably should have disclosed this, but I've been involved in several planning commission actions that involved projects proposed by this developer, and they have quite a bit. As far as the what to do with these conditions, do they become mitigation measures, or that they be part of the mitigation measures or part of the conditions? For two of them, I don't have a problem with them being mitigation measures, and those are the ones related to selection of the contractor and the ability of the city and DTSC to communicate directly with the contractor and receiving deliverables. And then the other part where if there's some problem with DTSC overseeing it, and staff correct me if I'm wrong, I can't quite see updating all the project plans being part of the mitigation measure. I think we really need to just put it right into the conditions.
Yeah, we can modify condition number 1 to include that.
Okay. So with that, I'll go ahead and make the motion, and that first of all, I move that we approve environmental assessment number 20-003 as adequate and complete in accordance with CEQA, by approving the draft City Council Resolution 22-26 and forward to City Council for adoption. Approve General Plan Amendment number 20-003 and forward that draft City Council Resolution to the Council for consideration. Wait a second, I need to go back to that first one. The Environmental Impact Report with modified mitigation measures. Recommend approval of zoning text amendment number 20-003, forward that to the City Council and the ordinance to the City Council for consideration, and then finally approve tentative tract map number 19118 and conditional use permit number 2025 with findings and modified conditions of approval.
Do I have a second?
I second.
Staff will take the vote.
We have all ayes. Motion carries.
The general plan amendment, zoning text amendment, and environmental assessment will be forwarded to the City Council. The decision by the Planning Commission on the tentative tract map and conditional use permit is appealable to the City Council within 10 calendar days. An appeal must include reasons for such appeal, any required fee, include the reasons for the appeal, and shall be filed with the City of Huntington Beach City Clerk.
Thank you, Ricky. So we will move on to our second public hearing item, which is the zoning text amendment 22-002, otherwise known as SB9 development projects. Do we have any disclosures from planning commissioners, starting on my right with Commissioner Adam?
No disclosures.
No disclosure?
Yes, I spoke with staff.
No disclosures.
And I too spoke to the staff.
No disclosures on my end, thank you.
No disclosures.
Thank you, Commissioners. Can we have a staff report?
Yes, Jennifer Villasenor will be giving the presentation.
Hi, good evening, Planning Commission, Chair and Planning Commissioners. I'm going to see if this clicker works from here. Oh, yeah. Okay. So my brain is here, so I need to be presenting from this seat. So tonight is Zoning Text Amendment 22-002 for SB 9. And what the request is tonight is to amend the ZSO to add Chapter 237, which is Objective Standards for SB 9 development projects. SB 9, the proposed zoning text amendment would establish development standards and review procedures for projects that are proposed pursuant to Senate Bill 9, or SB 9 as we call it, which became effective January 1st. And what SB 9 does is require ministerial approval of two things. It kind of changed two different sections of the government code. One, it allows 2-unit developments in single-family residential zones, and the other is it allows parcel maps to subdivide an existing lot in single-family residential zones, commonly referred to as an urban lot split. And as I mentioned, the law was signed at the end of 2021, and it became effective January 1st. It was part of the legislature's housing package. And the intent here was really to provide incentive to existing single-family residential property owners to add more units to their property. On March 1st, the City Council adopted an urgency ordinance to establish some interim standards. And that interim ordinance, pursuant to the law, it's allowed to be effective for 45 days unless it's extended. The City Council took action to extend the ordinance on April 5th, and that would stay valid for essentially 10 months and 22 days. However, we're bringing the permanent ordinance forward in a much quicker timeline to establish the permanent ordinance sooner rather than later. So SB 9 qualifying criteria, and this is straight from the law. The first thing is the property must be located in a single-family residential zone. For us, that's all the RL zoning districts, as well as specific plan areas where RL is the land use designation. The property can't be, and then there's a whole list of things that the property can't be. So one, it can't be a historic district or a historic site. The property has to be within an urbanized area as designated by the U.S. Census. All of Huntington Beach is. The property cannot be located on farmland, wetlands, hazardous waste sites, essentially areas where our RL designations aren't anyway. And then also, the proposed development cannot demolish or alter several things. One, deed-restricted affordable housing. So a property where there's already covenants for low income or other income level affordable units. Housing that's subject to rent control, we don't have that in the city. Housing removed from the rental market pursuant to the Ellis Act within the last 15 years, we don't really have that either. And then housing occupied by a tenant in the last 3 years. If there's a project that proposes housing, an SB 9 project on housing that's been occupied by a tenant within the last 3 years, they have to maintain at least 75% of the existing exterior walls. So essentially, the existing unit has to remain. And then there's some additional criteria that are specific to urban lot splits. One, it has to be 2 new lots of approximately equal size, and that lot split is a 60-40. So the maximum difference, I guess, is 60%, 40%, and you can see some of the examples in the exhibit. The minimum lot size is 1,200 square feet, and the urban lot split can't be subject to a subsequent urban lot split, and it can't have been split before. And then the last thing is the same owner or a person acting in concert with an owner cannot split adjacent lots. And that language is directly from the state law. Acting in concert, I think, is something that the city would have to establish what that is if this came up. So SB 9 does allow for cities to adopt regulations to permit these developments. What the law says is that for lot splits, we can provide for easements for the provision of public services and access to rights of way, but we can't require off-site improvements. We can establish zoning, subdivision, and design standards that are objective. However, we cannot adopt standards that would preclude at least 2 units of 800 square feet on each lot. We can apply a parking standard of 1 space per unit, although there are exceptions where we cannot require parking in areas that are within half a mile of a high-quality transit corridor, a major transit stop, and that's as defined in the Public Resources Code. And then also if it's within a distance of a vehicle sharing or a car share vehicle. And then we can also prohibit short-term rentals, and we can require an affidavit that the owner intends to occupy one of the units for at least 3 years. When it comes to being able to deny an SB 9 development, the law is very specific in that denial has to be based on the city finding that there is a specific adverse health and safety impact, and that impact cannot be mitigated. So there can't be things that can be done to reduce the impact below a measurable significance standard. So with that, we are proposing some objective standards. They're largely the same as what was adopted by the City Council as the interim standards. So some of those are the maximum size is proposed at 800 square feet in 1 bedroom, or if you have a larger lot, 1,600 square feet in 2 bedrooms. Requirement of 1 parking space in a garage or carport. Of course, the ordinance also includes the exceptions that are stated in the state law. A maximum height of 16 feet at 1 story. Side and rear setbacks of 4 feet. It has to have these developments have to have the same architecture, roof pitch, and color as the existing dwelling, if there is one there. Solar panels are required. Short-term rentals would be prohibited. And the development, in instances of a lot split, development has to occur in conjunction with the lot split. And that's to avoid having a vacant lot sitting in the middle of a single-family neighborhood. And then all the other standards of the base zoning district, in this case, residential low density, would apply. Again, with the caveat that we cannot preclude 2 800 square foot units on each lot. In terms of the review procedures, it would be a ministerial or by right process. So there would be an SB 9 application. If all the boxes are checked, eligibility is established, and they meet all the requirements, a building permit is issued. If there is a lot split that's also proposed, then your regular subdivision application and process would be required. The only difference is that there would be no public hearing at the end of it. We would approve that tentative parcel map administratively. And we can, like I said before, on a lot split, we can require easements. We wouldn't be able to condition off-site improvements. But pretty much everything else is the same as a regular parcel map process or subdivision process. And then in the coastal zone, a coastal development permit application and process would be required, same as any other development in the coastal zone. The notification requirements of our coastal development permits would still be required as well, and they would be applied to the project. The only difference is at the end of this, no public hearing would be required. And that's consistent with the guidance that's been put out by the Coastal Commission. So why go through the process of establishing some local ordinance objective standards? This provides a little bit of context, I think. This is what would be allowed on an existing single-family residential lot. You can have up to 3 units, meaning your existing single-family residence, so your primary dwelling. And then the law also allows 1 accessory dwelling unit and 1 junior accessory dwelling unit for a total of 3 units. If we don't adopt an ordinance, we could have instances where 8 units could be proposed where there formerly was 1 unit. As you can see on the top exhibit, you could have a lot split and a duplex on both new lots as well as 2 ADUs, which is consistent with multifamily ADU law, for a total of 8 units. With the proposed ordinance, whether it's a lot split or under just the 2-unit development, or what we call single-family residential duplex, a maximum of 4 units would be permitted. And this slide really just shows some different example lot configurations, because it doesn't necessarily mean, the law doesn't necessarily mean you have to propose a duplex. You could have a lot split in a flag lot configuration, as you could see on the exhibit on the far right, or split the lot divided right down the middle. You could have an attached duplex. You could have 2 detached units, and that would be considered a duplex for purposes of the definition in the proposed zoning ordinance. You could have a lot split in 1 unit on each lot. So this kind of shows you the various examples that could be proposed under the ordinance. With that, the recommendation is to approve the zoning text amendment, complies with state law. It provides consistency with the general plan goals and policies, both to provide streamlined processes to increase the supply of housing and increase the production of housing in the city, as well as to be thoughtful of the existing residential neighborhoods in the city. It provides clear standards and certainty in the approval process. And so we're recommending that the Planning Commission approve zoning text amendment and make a recommendation to the City Council for adoption. With that, the City Attorney's Office did help a lot in drafting the ordinance and making sure it complies with state law. Isra, Shaw, and I are available to answer questions. We didn't receive any public communications on this. And it doesn't look like we have anybody here to speak tonight.
Okay, thanks, Jennifer, and thanks, Isra, for your contributions to that as well. So do we have any questions from commissioners? Looks like we have a few. So I will start with Commissioner Ray.
Thanks. I have a few questions. One is, you mentioned this was in the Public Resource Code, but I didn't know where that was. Could you kind of define for me what is a high-quality transit corridor versus a low-quality transit corridor?
Well, I don't think the Public Resources Code defines low-quality transit corridor, but a high-quality transit corridor means a transit corridor where you have bus service at 15-minute intervals. It's debatable, but we have, essentially Beach Boulevard is considered a high-quality transit corridor. So everything within half a mile of Beach Boulevard, a major transit stop would be the Golden West Transportation Center.
Sure. Along those same, okay, and that was the transit stop, the major versus minor.
Yes, so a major transit stop is defined. I'm not sure that a minor is, but major transit stop would be the Golden West Transit Center.
Okay. A couple other questions I had. I didn't see in the legislative draft where it meant, although the PowerPoint did mention, where it excludes historical and landmark districts. Is that going to be in our code? I know we don't have any right now, but there certainly may be.
No, it won't be in the code. And we talked a lot about this, about putting essentially the entire state law in the code, which is all of the eligibility criteria. We largely just reference the state law's eligibility criteria because it could change. We expect that it, just like density bonus, ADU, Housing Accountability Act, they've changed multiple times over the years. And so we left out the eligibility criteria and referenced it in the ordinance. Where the eligibility criteria will be important will be in the application. So so let's say somebody goes online or comes into the counter and gets an application, there will be an eligibility criteria checklist that includes all of those, that list that you saw on the slide. And then if the law changes, we would just update the application rather than amending the ordinance.
Okay. The last question I had is on the solar panels. Is that an SB 9 requirement?
Yes, it's in the ordinance. It's also a building code requirement.
Explain to me about the building code.
It's required for all residential, most of the residential.
Any new construction?
Yes.
That's a requirement?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Adam?
Thank you. Jennifer, the 60-40 split, is that state law or is that interpretation?
It's state law.
State, so it just says the max. Okay, and then I also had a question on the solar panel. So if you get solar panel evaluation, sometimes they'll come back and they'll look at your house and say, you're not a good fit. You've got a east facing or north facing, or your square footage of your roof isn't big enough. Does that ever come into play? Is that similar to your question, Commissioner Ray? Is there any minimums where it just doesn't even make sense and it wouldn't even actually do any benefit? Or is it just you have to put it on no matter what?
It's a building code requirement where you essentially have to put it on no matter what, although there are exceptions and probably hardships that may be required that we implement now, and that would be continued to whatever exceptions there are would apply to SB 9 projects as well. This wouldn't treat it any differently than any other new residential construction.
Got it. Thank you.
Commissioner Rodriguez.
Yes, thank you, Jennifer. A question regarding the hearing. So SB 9 doesn't require a hearing just by right, correct? So do nearby residents still get a letter stating that there's some type of development happening in the area, or no?
No, only if there's it's in the coastal zone. So the coastal commission guidance says that the noticing should still occur.
Okay.
And so it's required for the coastal development permits, but typically if something's by right, there's no notification.
Okay. Thank you.
Commissioner Scandura.
Sure. And first of all, I just wanted to say Jennifer, is an outstanding presentation. I especially like the graphics with all, showing the different kind of variations and how lots can be split and where the new dwellings can go and where the old one can be. I just had one question for the city attorney, and this is on the draft ordinance. This would be, it's page 4 of the attachment is 237.08. Subsection E, and what it says is, in the event that the property upon which the SB 9 development project is located within a homeowners association, the applicant shall submit to the city written evidence of the HOA's approval of the proposed project concurrent with their application. So my question is that given that the city, except in very prescribed circumstances, cannot disapprove an SB 9 project, are we giving certain power to an HOA that the city doesn't have?
I would probably think about that, Commissioner Scandura. It's a good question. I would think about it in the reverse, which is right now the posture of the SB 9 legislation is a little bit different than maybe what you're thinking of, which is ADU law. So the ADU law has been amended to say that HOAs can't prohibit ADUs within their communities. The SB 9 legislation doesn't have that right now. So HOAs are permitted to prohibit SB 9 type development projects within their communities. What this application process does is just make sure that there's no problem there. So if you're an applicant and you live in the HOA community, can you please confirm right just up front that your HOA hasn't prohibited SB 9 developments? And it's just sort of a checkbox to avoid, further conflicts when you're farther down the road.
I see. So this is really based on the ADU, on the ADU situation, the precedent there where it wasn't specifically mentioned in the ADU laws, so they had to pass special legislation.
I think, I can't recall which year that was now. It's blurring together. 2017, or when the ADU laws first started changing, there was no prohibition on HOAs regulating the ADUs. Now there is, and so perhaps that will change with SB 9, and we'll see that in a subsequent year. As of right now, the effort that we made at the staff level was to make suggestions that really retain as much of that that control, or it's not even a control issue as to this specific provision. It's just to make sure that an HOA has not prohibited SB 9 developments.
Okay, thank you.
Vice Chair Acosta Galvan.
On the maximum height, if there's a very small lot, because the minimum is a 1,600 square foot lot and it's subdivided, and the owner wants to put 2 duplex units on each different lot, that maximum height can't preclude building those 2 units, right? So would they be given a waiver to do that then?
Yeah, there is a provision in the ordinance that says that we would make an exception if there's a case where the standards that are prescribed would not allow for at least 2 units of 800 square feet on each lot.
Okay, thank you. And then I just had a quick question about, I noticed something about community land trusts in there. Could I just get a little explanation on that? Because they're allowed to purchase lots in concert and do lot splits, yes?
I think so. Which section are you talking about?
Oh, shoot.
Oh, well, I could find it. Just give me a minute.
Sorry. Don't have the staff report.
I'll try to catch up with you as to where it is in the ordinance, but I believe that's a embedded exception in the SB 9 legislation as to certain parties who are able to do a little bit more than an ordinary developer.
Right. My question is more, could I get a definition on what that means? Is that homeowners forming a trust then, or?
I don't know if you want me to quote me. I believe it's nonprofit community type organizations that are housing, that develop housing.
Probably like housing advocacy groups.
Right.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you.
Habitat for Humanity, those kinds of groups.
Thank you.
Yeah, also would like a better definition of what lot split actually is. So by definition, does a lot split require after the split that the same owner own both of the lots that have been split, or can it be, it can be sold to another owner, right?
Yes, it can be sold to another owner. The only, I would guess, call occupancy restriction is that the owner has to sign an affidavit saying, so after the lot split, let's say 4 units get developed, on at least one of the lots, in one of the units, the applicant has to have that be their primary residence for 3 years.
Okay. And then a clarification on the language that you had in your presentation. So there was a provision in there that you couldn't then reapply for another lot split on either one of those lots, but the wording was a little interesting, right? Because I thought it said you couldn't do it, I don't know how to word this, but with some sort of planning with the owner that did the lot split on the adjacent lot?
Yes, and I think the intent behind this provision, and maybe a lot of these provisions, is so that you don't have a developer that comes in and buys up all, like, the whole street and develops these SB 9 projects. It's really, I think the intent is for an existing single-family property owner to make changes to their lot, whether they split the lot and sell it or they add another unit. The intent was really for single-family property owners to be able to add to the housing supply, and probably, and the incentive would be obviously to make some money or support their own like mortgage needs, right? So you can't have a property that's been previously split again, and then the law says so by a property owner, and then the law goes further to say, or somebody acting in concert with the property owner.
Right.
And it's very interesting wording because it's not defined in the law. And I think that would be something where the first time something like this happens, we'll have to go to our city attorney's office and figure out how we would interpret that or apply that language. I'm not sure why the legislature made it so vague, but I think it's to prevent this becoming a business for somebody.
Right. So you're much more eloquent with the terminology than I am. So thank you. You got exactly at what my concern is. So my preference, though, would be not to wait until you have a situation, but to try to predefine it so that it doesn't become ambiguous and maybe contentious. So I'm wondering, what do you recommend for handling that?
Well, I'll kind of put Israel on the spot, but I would think maybe if we keep it as in concert, then we don't have to think of every potential scenario. People are very creative, and so if we try to define it now, and if we miss a potential scenario that could happen, some sort of business that's formed, and we don't capture it in the definition of what's in concert, then we might miss out on being able to enforce something that really does need to be enforced, where there's clearly some in concert happening. But I'll ask Israel what.
So I agree with Jennifer. I do think that a lot of times, the law is often 2 steps behind what folks' ideas are and what they put together. In this one, I think, to me, having this be an untested requirement or criteria for eligibility is that you may have at the counter some really fact-specific situations come up that might make staff believe that this would not be an eligible property. I would have to leave it at just believing that it's a fact-specific sort of assessment. At some point, this applicant would be told that they're not eligible for a lot split or building a SB9 duplex, and then they would have to, I think, come back and rebut that, and we would go from there. I would add that it's untested, so my suggestion would be to leave it as is at this time. Perhaps another city would litigate it before Huntington Beach. Right. But in terms of what would happen in reality is that you would have some sort of facts arise that would have to be assessed and communicated by staff that they see just based on the applicants that they meet and the projects that come across their desk. They might have very similar, it might be, identical applications, things that would happen from the eyes and ears of staff right at that front line.
Okay. The other thing is we're not necessarily talking about a resplit of a lot that's already been split, right? So the way I interpreted the language was it does impact possibly neighbors of a lot that has been split, and now they want to split their own lot that had nothing to do with the original lot split, correct? Am I interpreting it correctly?
Yes. So let's say you and I own adjacent properties, and we don't act in concert with each other at all. We don't even know each other.
Right.
And I split my lot. You could split your lot. But what couldn't happen is I split this lot, sell part of it, live in part of it, and then I approach you and said, hey, I just made a ton of money. Let's do this with your lot. And then we're acting in concert, and now you would not be able to split your lot.
Okay. And what happens now with lot splits? Is this more constraining than what
Well, right now they're not
see?
allowed. The minimum lot size in a single-family zone is 6,000 square feet. So you couldn't split it. And most properties are right around 6,000. Some are, more 7,000. We even have some that are under, like between 5,000 and 6,000. But they wouldn't be able to split their lots right now.
Okay. All right, I think that's it for me. So let me see. I do have some commissioners in the queue. Commissioner Rodriguez, okay, and then Commissioner Mandic. Did you have a question?
Yes, kind of piggybacking on your comments about urban lot splits. Is that a new term? I mean, we have a lot of lots, residential lots in the city that do have current lot splits. Does this apply just to the SB 9 new law, or how does that work?
Yes, so urban lot split is defined in the ordinance, the proposed ordinance, and would be applicable only to Chapter 237. So SB 9 projects, urban lot splits would be a specific defined term for these specific type of projects.
So if somebody had split a lot in the past, they could come in years ago and apply for under SB, and that would be a legal lot to split at this point?
Yes, if it was a legally established lot and it meets all the eligibility criteria, yes.
Okay. And then, let's see. It talks about parking for existing units shall be maintained, so forth. Can it be rearranged? For instance, if, your house has parking one way or another, and then under this, can the parking be maintained but rearranged in a different configuration and still considered maintained?
Yes, yeah.
It's just numbers.
Right.
Okay. And let's see. Talked about, maybe this has been answered already, but I can't remember. A single lot cannot be sold separately. Can you go into that again if you have, or I don't know if you have already or not?
Where does it say that?
Let's see. It was after the parking. Residential units on a single lot cannot be sold separately.
Oh, so that means, so let's say you have a lot split, you put 2 units on each lot, or you can sell the new lot, but you can't sell the units, if there are 2, individually. So if you have a lot split and you decide to put 1 unit on each lot, you can sell both those lots with the unit. But if you have a lot split and there's 2 units, somebody's buying a lot with 2 units on it.
Okay, gotcha. And then, do these new lots, do they pay park fees and so, any of that? Or any of the costs that normal developers pay for?
Yeah, so development impact fees, sewer fees, drainage fees, like the public works fees, building permit fees would all be, these projects would all be subject to those fees. The only area where they wouldn't be is if there is an affordable unit that's proposed and deed restricted, then they would not be subject to development impact fees.
Okay. And can you kind of describe the ministerial process? What happens? I come to the counter, I want to do this.
Okay, yeah, so you would come to the counter and say, hey, I've got this lot, I want to do a lot split and put a duplex on each. We would give you an application. We would actually give you 2 applications. One would be for an SB 9 application, which consists of an eligibility checklist. So it would have all the state law eligibility criteria. And then it would also have, your typical application requirements. And then we would also give you a subdivision map application that we would give anybody else that comes in to propose a subdivision in the city. You would then submit that because if you were doing a lot split, we would route that to all the departments. They would create their code requirements and comments. We would plan check it in accordance with the RL standards as well as the SB 9 Chapter 237 standards. Let's say everything complies. We would then issue similar to a notice of action, but it would be director approved. So it essentially would say we've approved your SB 9 project and you can now proceed to building permits. Okay. And then they would go through plan check.
And that would be our planning director that would have the final stamp of approval, basically?
Yes.
Yes, okay. Okay, and then does this, after we approve this, does all the wording that finally goes into it goes to the state for another review? Or no?
You mean the ordinance?
Yes.
No, I don't think they have to look at the SB 9 ordinance. I mean, there are plenty of groups and probably the state that are looking at these ordinances, but it's not required to be approved.
think that's it. Thank you.
Vice Chair Acosta Gilbon.
I just had a question about under 237.12 for the affordable rental rate, it's G. Is that if you designate one unit, all of the other units get those incentives, or is it just that one unit?
Yeah, so we would apply that to the entire project if you're voluntarily providing at least one unit or more.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah, and one other question. So you had indicated that these were originally developed as a previous version of this was developed as emergency guidelines, and that originally you had planned to bring this forward as a permanent set of guidelines at a later date. So what was, did you feel that this was now mature enough that you could bring it forward and there wouldn't be a lot of future changes? Or just give me a sense of what brought the having you bring it forward now.
So many of the cities did decide to implement emergency interim ordinances, and that I think was a reflection of many staffs and many cities wanting to get a grip of SB 9 and what does it mean and what's the impact of it before really folding into their permanent regulations. And so we did that here. We put in a number of standards that staff ultimately decide to recommend that we keep. And so you have a handful of modified or new regulations, but mostly I think the approach that staff ultimately decide to take is to go ahead and implement permanent regulations for now, see how it works, and there's nothing to stop, further learning at a slower pace without having to continually extend the interim ordinance. I also think this is an issue that has a lot of attention, and so I think what the communities are looking for, housing advocates are looking for, is stability in terms of what cities are putting out there, and not feeling like, in terms of the emergency ordinances, where there's less flexibility just because they were very reactionary, I think, just to the legislation, to just give stability and more time for learning as the applications come in. I think that's how the thinking evolved.
Okay, and then if there are any developments in case law, so for example, for the line of questioning that I had earlier, what's the process for re-reviewing the guidelines and then bringing forward updates?
It would come forward just like this. So let's say the law changes next year and it goes into effect. We would bring forward an amendment to capture whatever the change in the law is. Or let's say there's litigation, there's case law, there's a pretty good example, and we understand that we need to change something in the ordinance, we would bring that forward. So staff would initiate it, an amendment, and bring it forward to the Planning Commission.
Okay, and can it also be initiated as a Planning Commission recommendation or some other action by the Planning Commission?
Usually what we would recommend is that the Planning Commission approve, I forget the name of it, but it's like a memo.
It would be a minute action to the council.
Right, so, and it'll be an ordinance that would go to the council recommending that these changes occur, and then the council would place it on the agenda to direct staff to make those changes.
Okay, all right, thank you. We don't have any additional, go ahead.
Yeah, I just, it really bothers me, and we talk about this on some other projects as well, but some of our general plan policies, for instance, it's preserve character, scale, and quality of established residential neighborhoods. Another one says maintain compatible proportions, scale, and character. And it's just like, this as, it's nature of this, that it changes the character and so forth in neighborhoods. So how do we, make a finding that does not violate the
you're
general
right.
plan?
This could be a very radical departure, I think, for an existing neighborhood. I would imagine that the majority of residents that live in neighborhoods probably don't even know about this law, and then one day you would just see a house being, potentially demolished and then 4 units going up. So we try to maintain the compatibility and avoid adverse impacts through the objective standards. Of course, we're limited by state law, but we try to keep in mind the intent, which is to increase housing supply, but also the need really is affordable housing. And so in doing that and thinking about that, and then also thinking about preservation and protection of the existing neighborhoods, we proposed objective standards that were fairly conservative when it came to design. So maximum size, maximum height, until we get some projects come through and we can see what that looks like. We also included some objective standards that speak to access. So if you have a street that's accessed from the alley, then we want that same, an SB9 project to maintain the context of the neighborhood. So it would also be required to have access from the alley. Same thing, you know, on a corner lot, what we really want to avoid is a driveway every 25 feet or 30 feet, and walkways and making it feel like there's increased density. You can essentially allow for the increased density very thoughtfully through the proposed objective standards.
Okay.
But it is a fine line.
It's all kind of subjective, you know, so how do you enforce that? But
Right.
I know you've gone through this and taken great pains to make it happen, because you must. Yes, but to do the best for the city. Thank you.
Commissioner Ray.
Yes, Commissioner Mandic actually mentioned the same thing I was going to be mentioning too, as far as the findings go, that I actually disagree with those that it's as findings it's not consistent with land use element policy LU1D, which is ensure that new development projects are of compatible proportion, scale, and character to complement adjoining.
We're still under public hearing, so
we are?
Yeah,
Okay.
I think you should hold those comments until deliberation.
Very well.
You should open.
Oh,
the
we're
public
still
hearing.
under the. We're I'm
just
sorry.
under questions still, I think.
But
we haven't opened
I
the
will
public
hold.
hearing.
I will hold
but
my
I
comments.
still think you should hold it until deliberation, though. Yeah, sorry. I was just very engaged with the conversation. So, okay. Yeah, I mean, I kind of have some similar concerns with Commissioner Mandic. I think you guys have done a very good job of putting this together, given the, current state of state law that's coming online. I guess, and maybe you can address this, the concern or the unease I have with this is that we may be running into issues with these lot splits, and they're handled at the ministerial level, and so the planning commission or the city council isn't, they're not necessarily conscious of issues that are developing, so that they are developed proactively. So if you can address like if you disagree with that statement, or you think, it's adequately handled by staff, I would be interested in your, what you observe from.
Well, I mean, the law is prescriptive in the process, so we can't adopt an ordinance that's consistent with law that doesn't call for a ministerial or by right process.
Yeah. So I know with a lot of the things that come in front of the, the developments that come in front of the Planning Commission, we impose conditions for proper screening between properties and things like that. To what extent does that go on with ministerial actions?
Everything has to be plan checked in accordance with the objective standard.
Right.
So there aren't conditions that can be imposed. If it's not already a requirement of the code, then we can't require it.
Right, but they could be introduced as objective criteria for future.
Potentially, yes. So part of what, to reiterate what Israel was talking about, is part of what is proposed with this ordinance is bringing forward an ordinance. There are some aspects, I think it's Flexible in that it doesn't exclude any eligible properties. It maximizes the amount of properties that could take advantage of the state law. But we have proposed strategically, I think, conservative standards so that we can avoid adverse impacts to the neighborhoods. And so to the extent that we adopt this ordinance, can have some time to see how the projects unfold, and then from there you make some assessments. Maybe potentially as these projects occur, a flag lot is the best type of lot configuration because it requires, a front unit and a back unit, which makes it appear more in character with the neighborhood, and maybe that becomes a new requirement. Or maybe we allow different standards. Those changes can be made at any time.
Okay. All right. Commissioner Ray, you're still on my board. So Commissioner Rodriguez?
Yeah, so currently we don't allow lot splits, but we do allow ADUs, correct, to be built?
Yes.
And in your experience, do we see a lot of ADUs being built in the city?
Yes, we've issued, I think, 52 permits just this year.
52. And that's more than what we've seen in the past, or?
Yeah, I mean, as of 5 years ago, we probably issued a handful. Actually, my bad. Last year, we issued 52 or 59 permits. Up to date, I think we've issued 35 permits, which puts us on track to issue about 70 permits this year.
And in your experience, I don't know if we track this data or see, but usually is it to build for existing family members, a growing family, or is it like for rental units?
It's kind of all over, and it depends on how much the applicant is willing to share with us. In some cases, they're very upfront and say, I want to build this ADU for my daughter and her husband, to have their own house on the property. Or sometimes they are saying, I want to build this for some rental unit. I'm a fixed income senior, and this is what I'm doing it for. So it's been mixed, but we don't always get the story.
Okay, that's very helpful. Thank you.
Okay, any other commissioner comments, questions? All right, so we will now go into public hearing, and I'm assuming it's going to be very short. So do we have any speakers?
We have no speakers.
Okay, so I'm closing the public hearing. We'll go into commissioner deliberations. So Alan, would you like to start off with your comments from prior?
No, I think I made my point in agreeing with Commissioner Mandic on I didn't really see those as findings as being consistent because there is such a potential for radical change within an established neighborhood. That being said, SB 9 in general, in my opinion, is just bad public policy, but it's kind of overreach from Sacramento into the local jurisdictions here. But I will vote for it simply because it'll bring us in compliance with state law. We have to follow state law anyway, so this just brings our zoning code in line with that. So those are my comments.
The only clarification that I might add is when you're considering these findings that staff has suggested to compare the proposed ordinance against the SB 9 defaults rather than what we were used to from last year, and then maybe implementing this ordinance. It's if we have no ordinance and our interim expires, we have the SB 9 state defaults, which will be in effect in the city anyway. So it's really, can you make these findings considering that the default is the state SB 9 legislation and you're adding objective standards and a process?
Commissioner Scandura.
Sure. When this does come up for a motion, I would like to propose one change, and this actually is related to Commissioner Ray's first question during our Q&A period a little bit earlier, and that is having definitions for high-quality transit and major transit stops. This is something I asked the staff about yesterday because the way, without that definition, it seems to be very subjective, or you can get it from a textbook or manual or anything like that. So I would like to see two new definitions for high quality, definition for high quality transit and a definition for major transit stop. And all it would be is just meaning the same as the definition in section, whatever it happens to be in the Public Resources Code. That way there's no ambiguity or argument from the applicant as to what exactly these two terms mean. I don't know if the staff had any comments on that one.
We don't have an issue with that. I would actually, instead of defining, maybe under where it says D, parking under the ordinance, and it talks about unless it's within 1/2 mile walking distance of a high-quality transit corridor or a major transit stop, maybe adding wording in there that says as defined per PRC section, whatever, 211.
That's fine with me,
Okay.
pursuant to section, whatever it happens to be. This next question, I can't seem to leave the city attorney alone on this, but anyway. Actually, if we go to, I think it's page 5 of attachment 3, and we go into the middle where it talks about, it's actually subsection E there, just right above objective development standards. What it says is, in addition to the foregoing, the city shall review each application for any other issues related to the adequacy of water or sewer services and/or the impact of the proposed SB 9 development project on traffic flow or public safety. In the event that the city identifies a specific adverse issue with respect to adequate water, sewer, traffic flow, or public safety, the city may deny the application and/or require the applicant to submit an administrative permit. My only problem with this last phrase here is it seems to give the city the ability to just either flat out deny or approve. I think it would, my opinion is it may be better due process to when the city makes a finding that there is this issue, that they require the applicant to submit an administrative permit. And then if they don't submit it within a certain time frame, then the application is denied, or if the administrative permit application is deficient, then the application gets denied. So at least it's clear here that you give that applicant due process right up front, or the opportunity to submit the administrative permit.
So ultimately, it's a policy decision. I think the way that this is drafted, however, is reflective of what is permitted or what discretion is allowed under SB 9, under the defaults. And so the default is under the state legislation, if the city identifies a specific adverse issue, at that point, the city can go ahead and deny. So we wanted to preserve that in the ordinance that we proposed, just so we maximize what's allowed, and then the community development director then has some flexibility if, he or she sees that the issues are workable, instead of going ahead and exercising that denial, which is permitted. There's nothing wrong there under the state laws. Have a little bit of additional flexibility to go ahead and then say, well, I do see this specific impact. However, if you submit an additional administrative permit application, perhaps we can work it out through that process. That's what the drafting choice is reflecting. I don't know if that satisfies your question. I do think ultimately it's a policy decision.
I think I see what you're saying here, because so there could be some narrow situations where the issue is of such that it just can't be remedied through an admin permit, so the city would have to deny. Is that what we're looking at then?
Right, so the city is authorized
Okay.
to deny in that situation without doing the extra paperwork of an administrative permit.
Okay, so then I get you. Okay, so I'll leave that one alone. Otherwise, those are the only two changes. I know this is a difficult one for the city, because basically what the legislature has done and state law is basically taking away a lot of our discretionary authority, a lot of our land use authority. But nonetheless, the legislature has the ability to do that, and even we as a charter city have to abide by these changes. I think the advantage to this ordinance is it first of all clarifies the process by which a party that's interested in doing these kind of things shall go through the city. Right now, all we really have, well, other than this emergency ordinance, is just state law. So this really would clarify, what an applicant must do when they're working with the city staff. The other, I forgot what I was going to say about the other thing about this. It does provide clarity to the process. Well, I'll get to the other one. I know there's a lot of people that are concerned out there that if this ordinance passes or SB 9 passes, then what's going to happen is investors and speculators and developers are going to just wholesale come into the neighborhoods, buy up all these properties, tear down the houses, split the lots, and just build duplexes all over the place. And clearly, SB 9 has provisions that prevents that from happening. And I think we've all heard, very well from our staff presentation. Only the property owner can initiate the split. And then furthermore, the property owner must live on that property within the first 3 years that property's been split. Furthermore, it says that that property owner can't go about and just start buying up adjacent parcels. That too is also discouraged. Basically, what this is intended for is your average homeowner, if they really want to, maximize the value of their property, or put a rental unit on their property. This does allow them to do that. So in that regard, and the other thing I was going to say is just, I think we have to remember that anytime you remodel a home or add onto a home or add on an extra story, that's a big project. It's huge. They often joke that this is one of those things out there that kills a lot of marriages, by the way. But actually demolishing a house, splitting lots, building additional units, that's a whole level above there. And I'm not sure a lot of property owners here in this city are going to want to, actually undertake something like that. I think, as we've already seen, they're going to be more inclined to go with the accessory dwelling unit. It's not to say we're not going to see any proposals under SB 9, but I don't think we're going to see them as much as a lot of people think they're going to see them. So I will support this with the addition of that clarification in one of the sections.
Commissioner Adam.
I just want to acknowledge staff, Jennifer, Ezra, thank you very much for that. I didn't do that during pre-deliberation, so I just want to say thanks. I will be supporting it, state law. I've just designed my lot split, so I'm ready.
Yeah, and I will be supporting this as well. I think Commissioner Scandura did an excellent job of summarizing the state of affairs. I do have some unease with the state law. Maybe it's because it's a bit of feels like a bit of uncharted territory, but I do believe that the language and what the city staff is proposing is the best that we can do. Given those changes, and if we need to reevaluate when it's appropriate, we'll do so. So, I will be supporting this with the changes that Commissioner Skinder is proposing. So, with that, we have Vice Chair Acosta Galvan.
Oh, sorry.
Yes.
I wanted to say that I too am in support of this ordinance. I know that there are some commissioners who voiced concerns about the state law. But the fact of the matter is we are in a housing crisis, and the state is taking away this authority from cities because it has been abused in the past to the point that we're in a massive housing crisis. And I think this ordinance is fairly conservative, and it allows for gentle density that homeowners can choose to employ if they wish. That's all.
Okay, we have no further. Do you have a comment? Okay.
Yeah, I'd just like to say, I really don't know. I'm so torn on this because I know we have to obey the law. I do thank staff. I think you've struggled with this to make it as palatable an ordinance as you can for Huntington Beach. I just think it is terrible policy. I mean, I really don't want to vote for this, but I guess I will. But I think it's changing our way of life, and definitely not, I think, maintaining the character of our neighborhoods. So.
Okay, any other comments? Okay, with that, I will close the deliberations and, no, actually, I'm sorry. Do we have, I'm going to call for a motion. Do we have a motion?
Well, me too. I'll go ahead and make the motion then, and that is that the Planning Commission take the following actions: find zoning text amendment 2022 is exempt from CEQA pursuant to government code, that the adoption of an ordinance by City Council, and well, rest of that stuff, and then recommend approval with one change, zoning text amendment number 22-002 with findings, changes, and by approving a draft City Council ordinance, which is an attachment to, and forwarding that ordinance to the City Council for their consideration.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Staff will take the vote.
We have all ayes, motion carries.
Okay, and by the way, I also wanted to thank Jennifer and Israel. I thought you gave an excellent presentation. I learned a lot. Having already read the information that came through, it was nice to see the presentation. It was very informative, so thank you. Okay, so...
I wanted to mention that the zoning text amendment will be forwarded to City Council.
Okay, thank you. So it's my understanding we have no consent calendar items, okay, and no non-public hearing items. Okay, with that, we will go into planning items.
I wanted to report that for the June 7 City Council meeting, we have the Olson Townhomes as well as the 7-Eleven appeal, and we currently don't have any items for the June 14 Planning Commission meeting.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
June 7th meeting, Olson Townhomes. I'm drawing a blank. Didn't we approve that at the last meeting?
It's City Council.
Correct. That was the project
City
from last
Council.
time.
Okay. I wasn't paying attention.
Yep.
Okay.
Another question. So City Council did approve the development at the old liquor store at the corner of Beach and Ellis then, correct? Something that we...
Yes.
Oh, the Ellis condos?
Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah, that was approved at the last meeting.
Yeah. Basically the same project that we and City Council rejected a while back.
It was the same project with some proposed modifications through conditions to fire access, fire life safety.
Okay. So I hope all the commission knew about that. I think most...
Yes, I saw it in the paper.
Yeah, many of us were on the commission, though, during that time, so.
Yes, okay. So with that, thank you, Ricky, for your report, and we will go into final comments from planning commissioners, and I would like to start that off tonight just by offering our condolences and our thoughts and prayers. Just before coming in this meeting, there was a major news development regarding a shooting at an elementary school called Robb Elementary in Texas, where, according to reports, 18 children, 2 adults have been killed. My heart just breaks hearing this, and I'm sure I speak on behalf of all the commissioners that our thoughts and prayers do go out to the families and anyone impacted by that. And having said that, go ahead, we'll start on my right with Commissioner Adam. Any comments?
No additional comments, but that's very, very sad, tragic.
No comments, thank you.
No comments.
Commissioner Scandura?
Sure, I had a couple things. I did attend the Historic Resources Board meeting last Wednesday, the 18th. They did approve their strategic plan goals, and their strategic plan year will run from June 1st of this year to June 1st of next year. They also mentioned that they're still not getting the demolition reports. I think that's something we'll have to work on them, because what they do is they look at these demolition reports to see if there's anything of historical significance that could be affected or lost in that. Another thing, certainly the tragedy that happened today in Texas was a terrible, terrible thing. Just too many of these things are happening, and it's awful. On a sad note for our city, we lost a city leader at the beginning of the month on May 4th. Phil Ingley passed away. Phil was a planning commissioner back in the 1990s. He served on the planning commission 6 years. He was the chairman of the planning commission 1 year. He was, and he was appointed by 2 city council members during his time. He also served as foreman of the Orange County Grand Jury. He was on the state parole board, and he was also on the city's personnel commission up until just a few years ago. I got to know Phil when I was chairman of the environmental board back in the late 1990s, and he was our planning commission liaison. And one of the things that he suggested was that the environmental board sponsor and a coastal environmental symposium, and we wound up doing that in 1999. It was really the first event that brought together business groups and the environmental groups that were involved in the Bolsa Chica wetlands and coastal issues, and it was a very productive symposium back then. Phil was a president of a local bank for a number of years, and he was a retired Marine Corps colonel. He actually was in combat in the Vietnam War. And throughout all of his years, up until just very recently, the man was in incredible shape. You never knew he was his age. So certainly a big loss for our city.
I just want to share that tomorrow is the Southeast area meeting, and it's at 4:30. The instructions on how to log in is on the city website, and I'll be joining that. Besides that, I have no further comments. Thank you.
No comments.
Okay, with that, we are adjourned.